Second piece we're going to perform, come on in, Barb, is a piece I wrote. This is called Blue Moon Sonata, and it sort of incorporates two parts of my life. One is I love to watch the moon in all its various phases and moods. And the second thing is it's sort of based on the blues, and many of you know I'm from the birthplace of the blues and down in the Mississippi Delta. So this is a little bit of my blues roots here too. Blue Moon Sonata.
This community of care is created through our work and time together, our commitment to one another. This is our covenant, to walk together in loving fellowship, to share our hopes and values. As we pass these baskets, we thank you for your generous gifts which support the work of this religious community and Unitarian Universalism in the world at large. As a reflection of our values, we are pleased to participate in the Change for Change program. The coins you place in the basket today will support the work of nonprofits in and around the Grand Valley. With gratitude, we will now receive today's offering. This congregation is a community of ourselves. Its energy and resources are our energy and resources. Its wealth is what we share. As we contribute to its life, we affirm our lives within it. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. Please join us in hymn number 159, This Is My Song.
For nearly 150 years, Americans have gathered in late spring to honor the sacrifice of those who have given their lives in service to their country. What began with dozens of informal commemorations of those killed in the Civil War has grown to become one of the nation's most solemn and hallowed holidays. Memorial Day is a way that we as a country have formalized a day to honor the men and women in our armed services who have fallen in the line of duty. And I do not come from a military family, and I myself have not served in the armed forces, and so every year on both Memorial Day and Veterans Day, I am aware that I am not the best person to be up here speaking. And so today, my hope is that my words will simply hold space for all of us to be in relationship with what Memorial Day means to you. Whether you are a veteran who returned knowing that some of your comrades have not, a family member of loved ones who did not return, or a citizen of the country who recognizes that men and women have died in service to this country. I am also aware that Veterans Day and Memorial Day are not the same thing. And so when I talk about or refer to our veterans today, I want to acknowledge that today is about recognizing those who did not come home. But I also want to hold space today for those in our congregation who did. When I think of the words that surround Memorial Day, the words that come to my mind are strength, courage, dignity, honor, wisdom. When we look our veterans in the eye and say thank you for your service, this is the archetype that most of us are visualizing as we express our words of gratitude. For many people, these traits are what the American flag represents, the best of what we as Americans aspire to be as individual human beings and as a nation. And there is great honor in representing our flag in that capacity. And we've also been told through the words of our own veterans in this congregation, through Phil Ellsworth and Richard Highland and Floyd Jorimo and so many other members of this congregation in their sermons throughout the years, that oftentimes wars become romanticized, while the lived experience of serving is far from the idealized archetype of what I just described. And so what do we do when the ideal potential lived expression meets that alternate reality that counters those above named qualities? What do we do with the reality of the violence and the harm and the trauma done by war? Do we simply become disillusioned and take down our American flag? Do we do what we've done in the past during Vietnam and look at our returning veterans and say that what they served for was a sham, creating in them even more trauma and moral injury than they were already returning home with? Do we stick our heads in the mud and continue to wave the flag in blind oblivion to how our flag is received to many people across the world? What do we do when with the fact that our lived experience is never, ever in reality the idealized version we play in our heads? How do we weave the ideal version of what we'd like it to be and the lived experience of what it really is together into a dignified, comprehensive whole? I invite us to sit with this tension today, because I want to look our veterans in the eye and say, thank you. We see you. We see the whole of you. The dignity, the honor, the strength, the courage, and the wounds, the fears, the traumas, and the physical, psychological, and moral injuries that also accompany service in our armed forces. Sometimes when we look at the big picture and we begin to notice things that are not working as a system, we begin to lose the capacity to acknowledge the real-life human beings within the system, the individual men and women who are still sacrificing their lives, their health, their limbs in our name. And when we lose the capacity to recognize them, we lose a little bit of ourselves. And so we live in a day and age where we as a country are working to reconcile this dichotomy. We're trying to reconcile the dignity of the veteran with the cruelty of the system. And occasionally the two blend into one another and we're not able to distinguish between them. And that is when the real harm is done. That is when the moral injury occurs. And as we mature as a nation, as we grow smaller as a world's people, I believe that we are being called to see, acknowledge, and embrace all of it without needing to romanticize it to the point of being unrealistic or to demonize people beyond recognition. And so, as we remember and honor those who did not come home on behalf of their service to this country, and as we recognize those who did make it home with their bodies, but came home changed, on this Memorial Day weekend, I invite us to recognize and lift up the whole human being. The dignity, the grace, the strength, the wisdom, and the wounds, the scars, the pain, the injury, and the brokenness that some of them returned with. Until we embrace it all, we will be a shallow and hollow depiction of what we as a society can truly be. I shared this story last year, but I'm going to share it again. A few years ago, one of the interns who was taking my class to become a chaplain was supporting himself through school and supporting his family by working as a CNA in a nursing home in Glenwood Springs. And one of the most powerful conversations he had was with an old World War II veteran who just needed a glass of milk at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the old man couldn't sleep, and this CNA, in his kindness, wheeled him down to the kitchen and sat with him while he drank his milk. And as they sat together in this little kitchen in a little nursing home, the story poured out of him. His story didn't come out to a therapist or to a minister or to even his family. This was a story he had never shared with anybody. But he shared his story to a certified nursing assistant who simply showed compassion, poured him a glass of milk, and quietly held space for him at 3 a.m., allowing a buried story to surface. A story that had never been shared. And I believe that healing occurred that night because one human being held space for another human being to tell their story. Every veteran has had their own experience while serving, while returning. The life they lived before they served, and the life they've lived after they've returned home. And for some, the time in service colored everything they've done afterwards. For others, it was simply a time in their life, they returned home, and they moved on. But I also often think about Phil's poem. How many times in our own lives have we been extended grace and we don't even realize it? How many times in our lives has the kindness or the higher decision of a complete stranger changed our lives in a fundamental way and we never knew it? And likewise, how many times perhaps has a random act of kindness of our own impacted and or changed somebody else's life in a way that we may never know? And so every year on Memorial Day, I think about Phil's poem and the story he told us a few years ago about a German soldier telling his platoon to let Phil's platoon walk on by. And he tells a story about how his platoon thought that they were safe, thought that they were just finishing up for the day. They were just walking along this area, and they didn't realize until later that they had actually walked into a place where they could easily been ambushed. And yet the platoon leader of the German troops who were above them told his people to stand down. Why did he do that? Who knows? But how many lives did he save? And how much of a difference did he make? And the poem that I read was not about that. It was about another story that Phil told about how he was going somewhere. He was kind of on his own. He turned a corner and he literally almost bumped into a German soldier. And they looked at each other, and they looked in each other's eyes, and neither one of them wanted to harm the other person. They made eye contact, they turned, and they walked away. One human being recognizing and acknowledging the humanity of another human being. And both people deciding that the other had inherent human worth, dignity, and value. We hear about the gore of war, but how many stories, how many other stories just like those of Phil, of individual soldiers, human beings, deciding to let somebody else just walk away. What does that mean for those of us in the year 2024? When we are deciding who we are going to be as a nation, what we are going to stand for, what we are going to stand up for, what we are going to speak up for. I go back to that little Facebook post I saw just this morning. What can one individual person do? What can I do? Said 7 billion people. One person may feel like they can't do a whole lot, but 2 people can do a lot more. 70 people can do even more. And a nation of people who decide to live, make decisions based on honor, can change a world. My invitation is for us to think about how we might change ourselves, change one another, and maybe even change this world. Let us sing together. Number 121 in your gray hymnal, We'll Build a Land. we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Go now in peace. Amen.